Let's do a massive Federschwert comparison. Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. I'm here at SG1, my club in Ealing in London, West London. And as you know, I get sent a lot of Feder, lots of other types of sword to review on the channel. And I've accumulated Federschwerts or Parrotschwerts, the practice longsword swords that we use in HEMA sparring, for longsword sparring. And what we've decided to do is take a whole bunch of these and do a big old comparison. Now, one of the most impartial things about this is I'm going to get students from my club to use different Feder extensively against each other and give feedback. So this isn't necessarily just Matt reviewing these Feder, it's actually people sparring with these, and they can use whichever ones they like. They can take them off the stage here behind and give me feedback and give you feedback and let us know how these different Feders are to use. What their strengths and weaknesses are, what they're maybe good for, what they're maybe not so good for, and also we'll be looking at durability issues as well. So some months ago you may have seen that I did a comparison of 3 standard and very common Federschwerts that are used in HEMA sparring, and these were very kindly sent to me by Regenyei Armory on the proviso that I completely impartially compare them. Okay, so these are mine to do with or destroy as I like. They're happy for me to completely destroy these if needs be, but these are 3 standard Feder. First of all, we have got the Kvetun standard Feder. Now, it is important to say that the standard Kvetun Feder has now changed to 2 other types of Kvetun Feder, which we'll see in a second. But that was the standard Kvetun Feder, which is still in widespread use around the world today. Next up is Regenyei's own standard Feder, which is very reasonably priced, very durable, and has been kind of industry standard in HEMA for many, many years, with, you know, tweaks and improvements. But the Regenyei Feder is very, very widely used, very highly respected, and made of very good steel, and is quite similar in characteristics to the Kvetun old standard Feder. And then the third model that they sent me was the Sigi standard Feder here, which is a more expensive model, a bit more refined, with some different handling characteristics, different type of tip, in this case a flared tip rather than a rolled tip, but nevertheless very highly respected, and a lot of people around the world who are dedicated and hardcore longsworders absolutely love Sigi Feders. So they're all very, very good makes, and these will all be compared against each other. In addition to those, we have the Victor Berbecut's historical Feder. This is modelled on one in an actual Italian collection, and this is a much heavier, bigger beast, very different to the standard, shall we say, sport HEMA optimized Feder. This is an actual replica of a historical surviving example, and has therefore it's very hard hitting and some quite different handling characteristics. Also being thrown into the mix is one of my personal training swords that I've been using for months, and I'm very fond of actually, but is kind of different to the other Feder in that it's not a Feder. This is actually from Krieger Armory in the USA, and you'll see that it doesn't have the flared shilt of a Feder, but it does have a spatulate tip, and it flexes in the same way as a Feder, and actually really you can use completely interchangeably with Federschwert. You can use this against Feder in drilling or in sparring with the same safety equipment. It doesn't really hit much harder than a Feder, and it handles a little bit more like a real sword than most average Feder, but as we'll see, some of the Federschwert actually do handle like a real sword as well. But this just kind of looks, I do Fury, so it looks a bit more Fury-ish. It doesn't look quite so German, so that will be compared in the mix as well. And finally, we'll be looking at Kvetun's 2 latest, most recent offerings, which I've actually done a first impressions review of recently, and that is the Lichtenauer style Federschwert, modelled on the example shown in Von Danzig. And this handles quite like a real sword and has the broad shilt here, and Also, the so-called 1570, the 1570 Federschwert, which has a hollow ground blade like an Eastern saber, which I worked on with Kvetun, a more traditionally shaped schild, and looks like the Federschwerts in Joachim Mayer's treatise of 1570, hence the name of this particular model. And I've talked a bit about the different handling characteristics. This is a little bit balanced closer to the hand, a bit more nimble. Different flexibility as well. So we're going to be comparing all of these different feathers against each other. So I would now like you to all be part of my grand experiment here. I'm going to lay out a whole spread of feather for you to help yourself to. I'd like you to come and take one, spar with it, have a go with it, and at some point change over with it with your partners. You can come and swap around, take different ones as you like, okay? So try and use as many of the different Federschwert that I've got on offer here, and I'm going to be gathering your feedback afterwards, okay? Thank you. Yeah. So we've got some feedback. I've gathered together some of the fighters here. So first up, let's go with the most radical sword here, which is the Victor Berbeckut's Italian historical feather thing. So this is modelled on an original one, and it's heavy and it's big and it's unusual. So tell us, who wants to go first? Stephen.
Well, I found everything about it wrong. It's far too heavy. All the weight is at the top, all the tip. It's massively spatulated and it's very wobbly. Okay. So all the weight is you're having to fight the weight all the time. Okay. So as soon as you put a cut in, you're trying to catch it. If they parry it, you're then trying to move it. You're trying to get the momentum going.
So it's sluggish and
yes.
How is it in the bind?
I don't think we ever got near a bind because it just kind of fell on them.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, no, it didn't feel.
Someone else.
Made you want to go flat.
So, Mateusz, how do you find it?
It was unwieldy. I didn't like it because anytime I'm good with a thrust.
Let's get you on camera.
Okay. So I'm quite good with a thrust. So when the tip is like.
Which one are you talking about? This?
No, this one is very nice because it's a light blade.
So this is this is the old Kvetun standard. Yeah.
So it's very point orientated. It's fast and you can get very good point control. So it's very good at thrusting and taking cover behind it. And this one,
the Victor Berbeckut.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm not a very big guy, so I need good position and a good point control. This one, when you just make a cut, you just fly with it. To take it back for a parry, it's almost impossible. But then again, when I did a good cut, from here, I could give it a much more momentum to have a very nice cut. Jacek thought it was a flat, but Jack was like, whoa, shit, that actually hit. But it's like, if you like it, then you like it, but it's not.
So you liked the standard.
Yeah.
So that Kvetun is the old standard Kvetun feather, which is pretty much a mid-range. It's pretty much an average, isn't it, for a modern sport feather?
Used to as well.
Yeah, because I'm.
Did anybody like this?
What? Yeah, you can. I mean, I think it's very intimidating, which I could see from him. He was moving back when I was going for the big swings, because he hits hard with authority to the hands. Yeah. But I think this one makes sense if both fences have this. because feinting with this is pointless, because you trying to throw a feint, the whole thing just wobbles, and then to bring it back in line, you already lost it. So you have to either commit with it. I mean, as he said, I didn't find the problem that it's heavy forward, because if you commit, it goes, but also have tendency to, a bit like a nylon sword, it flaps over the parry, and then it just hits you anyway.
It's quite floppy.
So you can get a hit, which probably was just a flap.
Do you think you would gain anything from both fighters having one of these?
Yes, a lot. You will be a lot smarter with doing your feints. You have to be much tighter with your moves. If you overcommit and you swing a lot, that will punish you. So I think it's a good training tool to not overswing. I happily use this against someone who has the same blade, because if you don't, then it's a bit of...
The problem is the other feather here are optimized for speed and sport combat and giving you the edge against
We fought against this, and when he had this in hand, I had this, there was no problem. You couldn't get bind on
this. So I think the headline for the VB Swordshop one is that, it's a replica of a real historical thing.
I can see the point.
And if you want to get something out of it, you really need a pair of...
It would be very, very entertaining, and you wouldn't be able to do everything like with the normal one, so you have to think about some moves.
Gary, you got a...
What I found, I think if I trained with that sword for like a few months, I would learn a lot of things about keeping the blade moving, because you kind of have to do it, right? I've never trained Montante, I don't know anything about it, but I initially when I picked it up, I was like, okay, let's try some like just sweeping moves. And actually, that was very nice. I had no trouble like just doing a nice big flowy motions, but I think in a sport context or in a feather, compared to something like this, it doesn't do the same job.
I do get the impression that this is a little bit in how it handles, a bit more like a Montante than
I mean, not the size-wise, but the feel, definitely.
Right, let's have a look at some of the other swords you guys use. So, what about the Sigi?
To me, that felt very similar to my Regenyei that I normally use. It was nice. It's quite. I had no problems. I quite liked the weight of it. It was very fast.
So in handling, pretty similar to a Regenyei or a Kvetun. I have to say, one thing I found about the Sigi when I used it was I found the grip a little bit on the cylindrical side, and I prefer a grip where I can keep my edge alignment.
I didn't really notice that, but I was up against the VB, so I was a little bit.
Okay. Did Matt use the Sigi one as well? How did you find the Sigi?
This is very similar to this one.
So the Kvetun? No, that's the... that is the Kvetun.
It was very similar.
So in handling, did anybody here notice any notable difference between the Sigi and the Kvetun?
Not from a first initial...
Okay, cool. Right, do we have any feedback on these new Kvetuns?
Yeah, so Daniel, with this?
I tried this one. It's quite wobbly.
Quite wobbly in the blade? Okay.
And also, it's quite light.
Yeah.
Even a bit too much.
A bit too light?
A bit too light.
You'd prefer a bit more blade presence?
Yeah,
so out of these
the other one is...
Did you try the other one as well?
No, I have this one. And it's similar to mine. I think it's probably the same model.
Okay, that's the standard Kvetun. Yeah.
And this one, I like it a lot.
Yeah.
This one is too light for me.
Okay, too light in the blade.
Too wobbly,
so I think this one's got a point of balance much closer to the cross.
Probably because I'm more used to this one.
Yeah.
So I'm not really used to that point of balance.
So you prefer a bit more blade presence?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, cool. And what about the other one, the Lichtenau?
I really like that. I really like this one. So it's sat really nicely in my hands.
Yeah.
I don't know about everybody else. I mean, the pommel's a little on the. Sorry, the handle's a little on the short side.
Do you want to come over here a bit more in the middle of the...
So the handle's a little on the short side just because I've got big arms, but that's actually fine. I didn't really notice that. I didn't do a lot of winding, so I'm not sure if this has any consequence. But it was nice in the guard. Jacek was finding the point a lot when he was fighting me with the other one. The tips were really nice to control. I don't have to do anything, and just the tip circles really nicely.
Cool.
So
did you use this one? Yes, sir?
Yeah, I used it against the floppy one. So
maybe not the fairest of tests.
Yeah, like binding on the long point was pretty easy because that was just so floppy. But I think it's a very good sword, well balanced. It's not the stiffest one as I would like to have.
You didn't use this one yet, did
Not
you?
yet.
Okay.
Yeah, this is the next one I like to. Maybe do you want to compare those against each other?
Yeah, let's swap around the swords and everyone have a go with a different sword now.
Yeah, let's do that.
So we've got some more feedback for you with some different swords here. So first of all, you really like that, don't you?
I did. I like the grip on it. It felt nice to hold. It felt reasonably controlled.
So this is the Krieger Armory. I can't remember the name of the model, but I'll put a link below. But this is what I've been using for drilling for quite a long time, and you'll notice this is not a feather schwert typically, but you can use it with feathers quite happily.
The only negative I had was it was quite floppy.
And that's what I found as well. It could definitely do to be stiffer.
But other than that, I really liked it. I liked the grip. It felt nice to control. It felt quite controllable as well.
So the edge alignment, I find because the grip's like a proper sword grip, and it's actually flatter that way than it is wide, as it were. You really get a really good purchase on it, and you know which direction your edges are.
The only issue is it was a bit wibbly.
A bit floppy, yeah. And Valerie, you're holding the Sigi here. What did you think of the Sigi compared to? I mean, you're used to using what, a Kvetun or a Regenyei?
Yeah, and I've also tried this one. I really prefer the grip of this, but I think my hands are smaller. So I find it much easier to grip this. Whereas with this, my hands weren't fitting quite around it.
You found the grip a bit too fat.
Yeah, it was too thick.
Which obviously, different hand sizes, you're going to get different experiences.
But I like this one. I thought it was a nice length. It felt comfortable. I felt like I could do the edge alignment fine.
Stiffness, binding.
Yeah, this bit really well. I felt like we kept running into the grappling and stuff, and it felt like we could get the control on, you could manipulate it.
Okay.
My issue with this, I haven't used it again properly, was the grip was far too small, and it was feeling like it was turning in my hand.
Yeah, so again, it's to do with grip. So I personally found with this Sigi, I find the grip a little bit too circular and a little bit too skinny for my hands, and I found it turning in my hands. And it will also depend on what kind of gloves you use. So I've been using the Kvetun Zyphosura gloves, which are kind of clamshell gloves, and I find with a clamshell grip, with a clamshell glove, having a skinny grip, it can lead to turning in the hand, but it depends what type of gloves you use. And if you use sparring gloves or something, you might not have that problem. What have you guys been using?
I've been using this one.
So this is the 1570 from Kvetun, fairly new model. This has been fairly universally quite liked, hasn't it, in the club since I brought it down?
Yeah, I can see why. It's super nippy.
It's very nimble.
And lots of control, and it's not very floppy. Because what I was expecting is, because it's so light, I was like, oh, it's going to have a lot of give, but it doesn't. So it does do well in the bind.
Yeah.
It's a little. Maybe it is a little bit on the short side for me. I'm not quite sure. I need to use a bit more, but I can imagine someone thinking the grip was too round. I personally didn't, but I use sparring gloves. So I don't use gloves.
I don't find the problem with this as I do with the Sigi. This grip I find just a bit flatter, and so the edge alignment's not a problem. I think you hit on an interesting point about the fact that the blade, it's quite flexible, so you think it's going to be floppy, but because it's quite light and the point of balance is far back, it doesn't have a heavy tip, so it doesn't flop around like floppy, like heavy-ended swords do. Yeah. It's quite snappy, isn't it?
But I don't know. I was trying to land some like stronger hits to see if the point didn't drop. The point drops. If your technique's good, the point will drop.
Yeah.
So it's not in the way, but I think it would take some getting used to.
Yeah. And Matt, you're holding the Lictor now. What did you think?
It was very nice.
Yeah.
Actually, because I made myself a boo-boo today.
Oh no! Yeah. You hurt your thumb.
Yeah. And this one was like, I can stand.
Oh, because you could
stand with a big shield.
I felt very confident.
That's actually a really good point. That if you're good at sticking your thumb up behind that shield, this has got a massive shield that's going to protect that thumb.
Before we went to say, oh, this feels so nice on my thumb. Oh yeah. But again,
how did you find the handling?
It was very fast in everything. It was very nimble.
Quite stiff.
Yeah.
Good in the bind.
We did like 2, maybe 3, and then into grapple, so I didn't feel anything like floppy.
So you two, out of these two swords, which one did you prefer? If you had to take one home, which would you?
I'd take this one.
You take the 1570?
Weirdly, I'd probably take it too.
The 1570?
It's very close. It's very close, but I think
I'm taking this one.
Yeah. Stephen wants my sword and you like the Sigi. So there you go. Different strokes for different folks, although...
that length of the handle, it makes a lot of difference. So I thought that I wouldn't feel a difference But when you go to the nylon one, all of a sudden it's like, whoa, I have no grip on it.
I have no leverage.
And then all of a sudden it's like, it doesn't feel...
So you'd like a longer grip?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
So
the Lictor now has a slightly shorter grip than the 1570, or Maya as I keep calling it. And I think everybody else in the club that I've spoken to about it prefers the length of the grip on the Maya to the Lictor now, the 1570.
Plus it's pretty cool.
And people do find the 1570 prettier looking. I mean, has got a very nice crossguard.
In terms of pretty,
you're not going to make.
But everyone's saying that the Krieger Armory one is the best looking of the bunch. Well, it looks like a sword.
You can wear that.
Yeah.
And everyone will go, yeah.
Hi folks, so I thought I'd do an extra summary here. It's the morning after the night before. And these Feder, I've got all of them here now, back home in my garage. And we had further discussions about them, and they were used a little bit more after the filming ended. And I thought it would be useful to have a summing up. So I'll keep this as concise as possible. First of all, the standard Feders. Okay, so excuse the Feders. I know they're Federn or whatever in German, but let's say the standard kind of Kvetun and Regenyei. These became a long time ago basically kind of industry standard, and there are other manufacturers that make very similar Feder to these, but these are perfectly good and most people are completely happy with them. Even when they use all of the more expensive or more exotic types of Feder, most people are happy with these. The standard Regenyei, the old standard Kvetun, which is no longer in production, people like them, people are perfectly happy with them. Thousands of people around the world are using them. And I should also mention as well that they are both very good value for money, I think. And I think the cheapest one is the Regenyei, and they're fantastic value for money and they do the job. So if you have one of those Feder, personally, based on my experience, my opinions and those of all my club mates, you don't necessarily need to get anything else. Something else, you might prefer the look of it, you might slightly prefer the aesthetics or the proportions of it, or the styling of it, or you might even prefer how it handles. Or you might just want something that's a bit more elite and a bit more fancy, but those basic ones do the job and there's nothing really to criticize about them. I'd also comment as well on the durability and quality. As far as we can tell, we've smashed and bashed these over the course of weeks and months for some of those models, and we haven't had any failures or any failings, with one slight exception, which I'll get to as we go along. Now, amongst the Feder that we tested last night, there are two that stand out as separate from the pack, should we say, because they're different kinds of things. One of those being the Krieger Armory, I think, is this the Sentinel? I think anyway. But anyway, it's their longsword, and this has Feder-like qualities and is completely compatible with Feder. So despite the fact it doesn't have a shield and it doesn't really look like a Feder, it doesn't hit very hard at all. It hits about the same as most Feder, but it looks more like a sword. So I'm a big fan of it because I think it works better in a Fiore environment, or if you're doing Vardi or perhaps even Marozzo. It looks more like a sword, and everybody, literally everybody in the club, likes the aesthetic of this sword. Really likes the grip and the fact that you can feel the edge orientation. It's got a hardened crossguard, which is a great thing, although more and more Feders are starting to have that as well. People didn't complain about the wheel pommel because of the length of the grip. That works absolutely fine. I actually use this regularly. I don't know if you can tell on camera, but it's beaten about. I've been using this for months for longsword classes, and it's stood up really, really well. You can see I'm running my bare hand along these edges. I have never filed or touched these edges. It's good hard steel. We only have one criticism about the Krieger Armory sword, and that is it's a little bit floppy. Okay, so it does have a little bit of distal taper, but not really enough. And I think everybody in the club would want to buy one of these if it started out a little bit thicker at the base and stayed a little bit thicker for the first maybe 15 to 20 centimeters and tapered down. So if it had a bit more distal taper, was a bit stiffer, we'd all prefer it. The point could perhaps, I personally prefer a roll tip. You know, I preferred roll tips. But the point's okay, we've not had any problems with that. But overall, we all love the aesthetic of this. We all love the grip, we love how it handles, but it's a bit too floppy. The other sword which really stood out as being a different type of thing to the other feathers that we were looking at is this historically heavy and rather unusual, so it's based on an original Italian example, rather than an example in Italy, feather by VB Swordshop or Victor Berbekertz. And this is beautifully made, okay, I've pointed this out before, but the crossguard, just the leather's very nice. It is very, very nice to look at. But it is a very different thing, and we concluded, whilst this is an interesting training tool if you get a pair of them, because it's very tip heavy and it moves basically more like a montante. It's not as big as a montante, it's as big as a big longsword, but it handles like a big old cleaving longsword, and it just doesn't really work against standard, shall we call them, sport HEMA feather. It's just a different type of training tool. That being said, we all agreed that you could get a lot, if you were a specialist longsworder, you could get a lot out of training with a pair of these against each other. They just don't really work very well against other feather, in our opinion. However, I do have one other minor criticism about this sword, and that is that the steel is clearly not as hard as the other swords, the Krieger Armory, the Kvetun, the Sigi, the Regenyei. They are all seem to be about as hard as each other, above 50 Rockwell. My estimation is that this one is probably a shade under 50 Rockwell, probably about 45, 48, something like that, because this has taken some edge damage from the other feather and even from hitting their cross guards. So this is a slightly softer blade, which might actually make it slightly less likely to break, depending on the heat treatment, but the fact is that it is not quite as hard as the other. So I think that's worth mentioning. So which were the favourite feather by the end of the evening? The Krieger Armory, not a feather, was pretty much universally liked, except everyone agreed the blade should be a bit stiffer. However, that one aside, because it's not a true feather, these were the three favourites. That is the Sigi and the two new Kvetuns. Now I'll just handle those one at a time. There were no major criticism. Incidentally, beautifully smooth blade. It's obviously good hard steel, the Sigi. Everybody pretty much quite liked the look of the Sigi. Some people weren't that keen on the shape of the hilt, but that's just personal aesthetics. There was one bit of feedback which personally I have, and also a couple of my teammates have, and that is that we find the grip on the Sigi a little bit slippery and small. Okay, so a little bit slim, a little bit round, and the finish on the cord wrap a little bit slippery. So that, depending on what type of gloves you're wearing, we found we didn't have a problem if we were just drilling with normal leather gloves, and you might not have a problem if you've got something like maybe sparring glove. However, several of us use Spes Heavies or Kvetun Zyphosura clamshell gloves, and those gloves they're very protective, but you don't have quite so much fine manipulation. And we found with the bigger gloves, we were having problems with this sword turning in the hands. Okay, so that's something to be aware of. The grip, you might not like it depending on what type of gloves you have or what size hands you have even. We did notice that people with small hands like this grip. But overall, the Sigi was popular. I personally would prefer a roll tip, but again, the whole issue of tips is a big and complicated one. Finally, I personally and several other people agree that the new Kvetun feather, so the Lichtenauer and the 1570, or Mayer as I call it, so the Mayer and the Lichtenauer, are both great. They're both really, really good, and basically everybody liked both these swords, and the Mayer was lots of people's favourite, and it was favourite for a very, very specific set of reasons. Firstly, because of the hollow grind, the fuller up here, people found that whilst the blade is flexible, it recovered to true very quickly because it's light. So a lot of swords, I mean the most exaggerated example is the VB Swordshop one here, have very heavy tips, which leads to them flopping when you move them when you change direction. However, because this has got such a light tip, although it bends easily, it returns to straight very quickly, and it doesn't oscillate a lot because it's got a very, very light tip. The second reason why people like this, apart from its just general looks, it does look good, is it's incredibly nimble. The point of balance is down here. Now, I've always felt that that's kind of what most feather should be like. It's part of their design. I mean, they've got thin blades here and a shield here. So from a safety and a speed and a sport perspective, this is a great sport feather. It's nimble at the tip, it's snappy and whippy and quick, but it also balances very close to the hand and moves around super quickly. So for a modern sport HEMA feather that's also inspired by Mayer's treatise of 1570, this is a great, great option. A few people, however, preferred the feeling of the Lichtenau because it does feel a bit more like swords that we're familiar with. If you take something like the Albion Talhofer, close your eyes and handle it, it handles very, very similarly to this feather. So this handles more like a typical 15th century longsword. This is more like an optimized for sport feather, and I think that's probably what Kvetun were going for. And from a personal perspective, I'll say something else about these Kvetuns. I believe that these, if we look at fighter jets, you've got, you know, of third, fourth and fifth generation fighters. I feel if we're looking at feathers, we can split them into generations. And I feel in refinement of the design, the proportions, the technology involved in these, I personally feel like these Kvetun feather are the next generation, and that other manufacturers are going to have to do a bit of catching up now. Just in terms of the, you know, the detailing of the design, the blade cross sections, you've got two different blade cross sections here, the details of the crossguard shaping, just the fit and finish as well. So personally, I feel there's nothing wrong, as I've said, there's nothing wrong with a standard Regenyei or Kvetun old school feather. They do the job. But if you want something a little bit further up the kind of technology and refinement scale, then these three, the Sigi and the two new Kvetuns, are probably the ones to look at. And out of, if you're looking at the Kvetun, out of these, if you want a really sport optimized, really, really quick one, probably the 1570 Mayer. And if you want one that handles a bit more like a typical 15th century longsword, probably the Lichtenau. Right, I hope that has been useful to people out there. I think I've probably covered all bases. If you do have any other questions or any other things you'd like us to test, I understand the durability. Without literally trying to break these, there's not much more I can say about the durability. The only thing I've noticed is the VB Swordshop one. It seems to be soft as steel, but none of the others have taken any bends or a set, or, you know, we've had no breakages. So far, the quality of all of these manufacturers seems to be top notch and to be relied on. Also, if you're trying to choose between these, look at the warranty periods. I know Kvetun do a 1-year warranty period. Some other people only do a 6-month warranty period. That is something to consider, because I know people in my club who've had a blade break after 9 months and Kvetun will replace it. You know, that's not true of all manufacturers. Some it might be true within 6 months. Some of the others might be true of a year. But anyway, check it out for yourselves on their websites. Hope this has been useful. If it has been, please give me a thumbs up, and I hope I'll see you back on the channel soon. Cheers, folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.